Welcome to another edition of Thought to Action presented by the London Centre for Policy Research. I'm Tim Wilson. You can find us on londoncentre.org, and if you can, please follow us on patreon.com/thought to action. Any help we can get, we're also available on Twitter, Rumble, you name it, YouTube. We have a Thought to Action channel. You name it, we're on it. With me today is my good friend and distinguished fellow of the London Centre, Captain Retired Pete O'Brien. And we're just going to riff on infrastructure. And following President Biden's discussion meeting with President Putin of Russia, in which he laid down 16 critical infrastructure areas that he would regard it as a red line for them to be crossed. It'll be interesting to see where things go. Pete, your thoughts on?
I'm always concerned, first off, whenever a president uses anything that could be interpreted as a red line warning. There is a natural recoil, because what it does is it obviously attempts the other guy to walk right up to the line. And there's an old story that goes that when Jack Kennedy was in the weeks immediately prior to his inauguration, preparing for becoming the president, that one of the members of Eisenhower's national security staff cornered him and said, Mr. President, one of the things you need to do, and it needs to be at the very top of your list of priorities, is you need to sit down and decide for yourself what your red line is for the use of nuclear weapons. And once you have firmly figured out what that is, tell absolutely no one. And I think that that's an important concept, is you don't want anybody else to know what your real red lines are.
Absolutely.
Because it just tempts the other guy to walk right up to that line and see if in fact it's true. And
of course, if you're going to test this president, you might just start with, let's say, number 16 on that list of priorities and just step over that red line a bit. And the recent history of red lines and presidential politics, and the example of President Obama and his Syrian red line, does not instill confidence that anybody needs to take these red lines seriously.
Right. And it particularly generates, I know we wanted to be talking about infrastructure, but I would just raise the final thought on red lines, is that if you think that somebody is in fact going to buckle on the red line number 9 or whatever it is, then you might be tempted to cross that red line. And what may then happen is you get the essentially the absurd response, that there is nothing happening, and all of a sudden you get this too harsh a response, and suddenly we're in a situation where the scenario is escalating, and we have lost control just as the other side has lost control, and now we're essentially slave to the events, and we don't want that to happen.
It does also seem to me not to have been wise to give an adversarial leader a list of what you regard as the 16 most important priorities. That would seem to me to be a very strange way to go about thinking about your country first.
Right.
And let's talk a bit about infrastructure protection and basically how we think we might do things differently, or what we would advise in this era where ransomware has become this incredibly increasing threat to all sorts of things, especially critical infrastructure. Continuity of ops is your specialty. Do you want to talk about that for a bit?
Yes, and I think it's important to recognize that a lot of work was done on this over the years. And it started back. Actually, it started in the 50s. Eisenhower, arguably the best planner, whoever occupied the White House,
Yeah.
Began a great deal of this work, and it was carried through each one of the administrations. And then someplace along the way, the press decided that it was time to ridicule it. And if you may or may not recall, viewers may or may not recall, if they're old enough, that Reagan was a big believer in these kind of preparations because, among other things, it's in his job description, but also it acts as a deterrent to someone who might be interested in attacking the United States to know that there is robust survival.
Absolutely.
So what came out it was leaked, I guess, out of someplace out of Congress and then found its way into the newspaper was a tiny slice of the continuity of operations part of government in which there was a requirement to keep a postal service working in a post-nuclear exchange. And so this turned into this ridicule of the nuclear post office kind of thing. But the fact of the matter was that Reagan was right, is that you need to have a cross government architecture that can in some parts survive virtually any circumstances. And then that needs to also percolate down into the rest of society. And so over time, we have done a series of these studies. Now, after September 11th, 2001, this was to at least a certain extent reinvigorated. But again, it ground slowly forward. And there was a presidential decision directive, a PDD so-called, that was issued in 2012 under President Obama's signature. And I believe that it remains the definitive presidential doctrine, and it identifies, my apologies, I have not checked this list against what President Biden released the other day, but it identified the key, or what was called the essential critical infrastructure, the 16 critical infrastructure.
Yep.
The chemicals, and I'll read you some of them just so you have some idea of what they're going at. Chemical sector, communications, critical manufacturing, defense industrial base, energy, food and agriculture, healthcare, information technology, et cetera. So, as I said, there's been a good deal of work done sort of at the grunt level to identify all those pieces, but the common thread that you keep running back through on all this is that all of this is integrated digitally. It is all integrated with machinery, which really is, your laptop hardware and software that has, Intel stamped all over it. And the problem with all of that is that all of that is susceptible to ransomware, to electromagnetic pulse, and of course, sort of my favorite disaster, the coronal mass ejection, that a huge ejection of plasma from the sun, which strikes the earth and can cause all sorts of horrible damage, and all of those things need to be in some way defended against.
Yeah, causing basically a natural EMP, electromagnetic pulse of a magnitude that would do a huge amount of damage to everything electrical on the planet, on the side facing the sun when it hit.
Right.
Let's just bring this down, though, from we've been talking about government responses and, presidential and federal government and defense and all the rest of it. The problem is in today's society, computers are so integrated into every aspect of life. Every business runs on a laptop or more. Every major business has certainly done some continuity of ops planning, in particular with respect to data storage and backups and what have you, the common sense stuff. But as you rightly point out, it goes right the way down, and contingency planning is vital to every business that there is, because we have a saying in the military, which you're well aware of: prior prevention and planning prevent poor performance. Basically, that's thinking about what's the worst thing that could happen, and then what would I do if that happened?
Right.
Every business needs to do that, and every home needs to do that. And then you have a great example that I just ask you to repeat for everybody about fire extinguishers.
Right. I look around my house. I have a half a dozen fire extinguishers around the house, and the question that always comes up is people say, "Well, are you expecting a fire?" And my answer is no. I'm going to make sure, but if one happens, I'm going to get rid of it. And it's this very simple thing. It's
Yep.
a pound of prevention is worth a ton of cure kind of thing. Fire extinguishers are really cheap. They're really cheap. They're easy to operate. And if you don't have a couple of fire extinguishers in your house, you're not thinking through some of the basic problems. And the fact of the matter is houses catch on fire.
Yep.
For the silliest damn reasons. And so my question is, do you have a fire extinguisher? Particularly as summer approaches. Here, summer's here in Tidewater, Virginia. Everybody's grilling. Well, do you have a fire extinguisher near your grill? I'm just curious. Do you?
Yeah.
It just is a simple prevention. Particularly, a grease fire.
Yep.
Don't use a hose on it. Use a fire extinguisher.
Yep. Well, in my case, I keep a fire blanket for exactly that reason.
Exactly. And so you look at that kind of thing and you say, okay, what is the intellectual equivalent of a fire extinguisher when we look at the power grid? And the answer is have we hardened the power grid against EMP and against an aggressive attack on the SCADA system? Yep. And the answer is geez, I don't think so, and at least not enough. So how much would that cost versus what would be the effect if there was a catastrophic attack on the power grid? And the answer is a catastrophic attack on the power grid shuts everything down. Even if you have a home generator, a catastrophic attack on a power grid could knock out the power systems across North America for weeks.
Yep. In
some cases, in some areas, it might be months.
Yep.
And I don't care how well prepared you are. Nobody has 3 months of propane sitting in the tank in their front yard to power up their generator. It just can't be done. And that power system failure would affect everything. It's not just the lights in your house. It's the power to the hospitals, because the hospitals don't have emergency power that lasts a month. Yep. It's the power to distribute your food. It's the power to distribute your water. Yep. So if you're living in a large city, if you're not on a well, you're living in a large city, how are you going to get water? You're not. How are you going to get your sewage pumped out of the street in front of you? You're not. How are you going to get all those other things, food brought to your grocer? You're not. Everything breaks down. You're not going to have your medicines if you take a daily medicine. All those little things all start cramping up pretty quickly. And as you just pointed out, everybody's on a computer now.
Yeah.
So that has provided us all sorts of benefits, and one of the benefits is just-in-time logistics. No one has huge warehouses at their grocer anymore. The grocer is getting 2 or 3 trucks delivered to driving into the grocery store every day and providing just-in-time logistics to make sure that the creamer is there, the coffee is there, the meat is there, the milk is there.
Yep.
And there's not 3 or 4 or 5 days worth of those supplies in the back of the grocery store anymore. They don't do that anymore.
Yep.
All of it is integrated via these information networks, and all those information networks are vulnerable to hackers, to malicious software, to EMP attacks, to coronal mass ejection.
And absolutely, and that's kind of that's why the federal government has to be involved in critical infrastructure planning and thinking and protection. But again, to step it back down to the individual businesses, if you run any type of business or even your house, let's step right down to the house, the individual family. Fire is a devastating thing. We talked about that. Floods are devastating. What if you live in a flood zone? What precautions have you taken? Have you got things like a simple go bag ready?
Right.
What are have you thought through what are the most valuable things that you have to rescue and get to high ground or evacuate? And in a business, again, what happens if your business premises catch fire? How do you keep the business running? What happens if it may not be ransomware attack? It could be some sort of virus that just corrupts your data. All of these things matter, and they matter to the stage where just-in-time logistics, we saw a great example early on in the pandemic last year. What if the paper manufacturers were hit by ransomware and suddenly toilet paper became rare again? I mean, we went through this panic buying where it vanished off the shelves simply because people thought it was a good idea. Okay. And the industry continued to produce enough toilet paper for everybody in the country, and that has kind of gone by. And there's been this wave effect where they had to produce more, but now they've produced more and people are using what they stocked up.
Right.
If you bought stocks for just in case, as far as I'm concerned, of toilet paper, you keep that toilet paper. You found somewhere to store it.
Right.
Don't use it up. Keep it, because it's something else that could vanish off the shelves again if there's another panic, or if the paper industry happened to be one of the industries not listed as a red line and yet did get hit by a major ransomware attack.
Right. And this isn't to make everybody, we're not trying to turn everybody into a prepper.
Nope.
It is, although there is, a lot of the preppers make a lot of sense in this regard. If you have a kid or a wife or a husband and they have a health problem or any kind of issue, you always make 99.9% of the people in the world do. You make provisions for, hey, if we're at the mall and something happens, my wife or my mother or whatever it is has an attack, you go through the, you take the steps mentally and say, we're going to do this, 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 and this.
Yep.
If my granduncle who has problems moving around now, if he falls down, this is how we're going to make sure that, we're going to be able to take care of him. You think through little things like that. That's all we're really asking people to do.
Yep.
And yet one of the things that I've bumped into in consulting since I got out of the Navy is you go to various companies and you ask them, do you guys have a continuity of operations plan? Oh yeah, everybody does. Yep. Everybody has one. Who here's read it? You might, if you got the entire boardroom there, you might get one hand to actually go up. Honestly, who here has actually read the bloody thing? One hand might go up. Have you ever exercised this? Do you know that the people in the factory floor out there, do they know what they're going to do if something happens?
Absolutely.
And invariably the answer is no. And I was listening to, there was one hospital here in the area. They were going through, it got into the paper, they were talking about, their disaster preparedness. And they had actually done something that had occurred to me years ago, and I remember working with some folks on, was, do you know who has SUVs and pickup trucks?
Yep.
Because you may want, and particularly we're in the Tidewater, we get flooding around here. Do you got that handy list of who you call up, who can actually get down that street, or that street, when the water is now over the street? Do we have that handy list? And they had actually gone and done that, because you need to do that if flooding is an issue in your area. Yep. So it's just reasonable steps to make sure you can keep doing the things you need to do when bad things start to happen. Because when bad things happen and you're prepared, they're not as bad as they seem. When bad things happen and you're completely unprepared, they get worse, and they get worse in a hurry.
Absolutely. Prior preparation and planning prevent poor performance. If you've thought through a scenario, if you've thought through, what if a tornado hits today? What if an ice storm comes this winter? What am I going to do? If you've already thought through the plans, you suddenly don't have to think while you're full of adrenaline in an emergency panic mode. You don't need to panic because you've prepared, at least mentally, even if not physically. Mental preparation is a lot of the battle.
And the real lesson to take away from this, I think, is that people need to poke their city council, their mayor, their governor, their congressman, and poke them in the chest and say, hey, what are you doing to make sure my city, my state, my country is ready for the next flail? And a lot of these, people say, well, we can't know what's going to happen next. And the answer, of course, is no, we can't. But a lot of these answers are answers in common. That the response to a snowstorm, an ice storm, a power loss, a flooding, a hurricane or tornado, there's about an 80% overlap of things that we need to be capable of doing. And then there are other things that we need to also think about. One of the ones that people don't think about at all is what happens if there's a power hit and we can't clear out cesspools and we can't clear out the sewer lines.
Yep.
A huge health issue.
Yep.
Very, very quickly deteriorates into, concerns about, those kinds of diseases, cholera, et cetera. And so the question should be asked at, town council meetings, at city council meetings, at letters to the governor kind of thing is, what's your plan?
Yep.
We want to make sure you have a plan and that's exercised.
It's, as you mentioned earlier, training is kind of involved. When you in the military, of course, what do we train for? We think through what might we have to do in the military. Okay, let's train so that we're capable of reacting to that situation well. Emergency planning is very, very similar, and people need to A, have thought it through for themselves, and B, at least know that there is a plan and where you might get help for whatever situation you're in. Peter, Brian, we'll talk about this some more. Thank you so much for this. Always fun talking with you.
Yes, sir.
To our audience, thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please support us, visit us, like what you see on YouTube, like what you see on Rumble. Give us a thumbs up, spread the word on Twitter. We are at londoncenter.org. We are on patreon.com/thought2action. And we are all over social media if you look for us. Thank you for watching. My name's Tim Wilson. This was fun.